peace, a state of trust, harmony, mutual understanding. Its opposite, violence, that which causes harm. We can view peacemaking as inward work or as outward work. It can encompass our inner world, our dealings with one another, relationships within or between organizations, within society or between nations, and our relationships with all beings within the web of life, human and non-human.
There is a very direct relationship between our own peacefulness of soul, our own self-esteem, our own sense of ourselves as worthy people in the world, and whether or not we will be the ones to inflict pain upon others, whether or not we will be the ones to think twice about violence and war, to do everything we can to resist it, or whether we will be the ones to jump first to that as a solution, quote unquote, to the world's problems.
Peacemaking calls us to look inward to the source of our feelings and actions of hostility and violence.
If we don't have peace within ourselves, it's very hard to be in relationship with others in a peaceful way.
For some people, building inner peace through meditation and other spiritual practices is a focal point of their lives. Others strive to become more aware of their emotional life and to communicate in ways that create mutual understanding and empathy.
One of our founders, Channing, would call it self-culture. You know, look to yourself to transform yourself. And certainly the Transcendentalists modeled on Emerson said, look to yourself to find your inner connection with God and with nature. And the Universalists speaking of love and caring. So I believe we have a strong tradition of looking inward. What we don't have so much is how do we practice that as Unitarian Universalists?
Peacemaking, then, can lead us on a spiritual path of self-awareness and self-discipline, transforming anger into compassion, first and foremost for ourselves, then toward others.
When we talk about our role and our own inner peace, I don't know that we can really have peace, the big peace, if we look at inner peace without looking at other realities or realities of other people, other experiences. We've got to be not just inward looking, but we've got to understand what does it mean to be in relationship with someone else.
If we are to be peacemakers, we must learn how to relate in a way that continually affirms the worth and dignity of others.
When we empathize with people and when they feel heard, it gives them a chance to heal the wounds of being thought of as unworthy or as being enemy. So I think we can do in our day-to-day conversations, offer deep listening, deep healing to even people we don't even know. And they in turn will not project enemy images onto others and maybe can be in a place of peace to work out peaceful resolutions in their own lives.
While empathy may be hard to achieve, there are ways to communicate with others in disputes that help us to reach respect and preserve right relationships, if not understanding and harmony.
When you have people willing to articulate what their needs are, what their feelings are, what their values are, not their positions, but their values around whatever the issue is between the parties. And when the other party is willing and able to listen to that, to hear it, then you're able to do some engagement that gets you to a new ground, to what many people will call a third way. Okay, I've got my way, you've got your way. There is some third way if we can step back from our positions. But that takes a certain groundedness and a certain openness to discovery.
Active listening is a form of listening and responding that helps you focus on understanding others' views by listening carefully and empathetically and reflecting back what you hear. Active listening helps to avoid misunderstandings and improves the chances of developing a solution to a problem.
We have to have a way to allow each other to be who we are in that conversation.
Another method to communicate with others is called nonviolent communication. Developed by Marshall Rosenberg, it teaches the importance of empathy, honesty, and clarity when expressing feelings and needs.
It is basically an empathetic model. It's asking us to see ourselves as worthy and working on that inner peace and so that we can see the other person as worthy. So when we come together, we communicate that with our whole beings and offer healing and also a chance to be really honest with each other with what we need.
While conflict may be inevitable in our interpersonal relations, part of peacemaking is coming to an outcome that's acceptable to all, a win-win resolution. A number of conflict theorists and practitioners advocate conflict transformation as opposed to conflict resolution. In this view, engaging in conflict can produce constructive change and builds better relationships. Conflict within groups or organizations, such as congregations, are no less contentious. Resolving differences in larger groups, coping with difficult people can be achieved by using consensus. Other approaches, such as mediation or deliberative dialogue, allow for differences within a community.
They're helped to discover what other way of resolving this dispute exists besides the positions they've brought, which are often hard and fast lines in the sand. They're encouraged to look at what values and what interests and what deeply held ideals they have that are at play in this dispute. And usually out of that examination comes another way to resolve this conflict that is more acceptable to the parties.
Where there's violence and oppressive structures, this leads to dissatisfaction and eventually rebellion. I think people become so tired of the oppression that happens in their countries or in their cities or in their homes that at some point violence breaks out. So I think we start to need to go back to the root cause and eliminate those causes of oppression that lead then to violence.
Within a larger society, peacemaking can be viewed within the context of what is called structural violence, violence that is systemic or institutionalized.
Structural violence, in my mind, represents such major dysfunctional elements of modern life as pervasive poverty, for example, or unchecked disease, the threats of climate change unmet, fundamental disparities of wealth and income from one part of the world to another. And therefore, those kinds of major disjunctions are potentially a cause of enormous violence because they bring about instability.
If one is not getting clean water, basic immunizations, and basic nutrition, those basic needs must be met to address both the issues of structural violence, but also, in a positive sense, invite all of us into participating in the creation of cultures of peace.
As we see, some consider peacemaking as anti-oppression work.
There's a marginalized identity because there is a corresponding privileged identity. The name of the game in our culture is to get as many privileged identities as you can.
This disparity in power is a dynamic in many conflicts, both societal and interpersonal. Some theorists view peacemaking as working toward power with versus power over.
Power with suggests inviting different voices into the conversation. Power over suggests to me being foisted with someone else's agenda.
In this view, moving toward peace requires a jointly developed power, power to control or define an environment with the consent and participation of all, rather than coercively through domination.
To address such issues as resolving the conflict in Iraq, stopping the genocide in Darfur, addressing issues of climate change, addressing issues of trade and security for the American people. That can't be done alone. That can't be done through the exercise of power over. It has to be a manifestation of partnership, of power with.
Perhaps the notion of peace that first comes to mind for many is that between nations. When there is conflict between nations, where human security is seriously threatened, is there such a thing as a just war?
Just war is a theory and became a tradition in the Christian church with the linkage to the Roman Empire. And it recognized there may be times when war is necessary, much as we would like to avoid that. So they set down certain conditions and rules by which they felt they could apply these, for example, when it's purely defensive, and then they could go to war.
Just war theory's foundation is that war is morally wrong, but that there are certain conditions for legitimate defense by armed force. But there are other ways to look at the use of force.
The concepts of pacifism versus just war may be too great a dichotomy and fail to address the fact that there are third ways, as it were, that there are ways to build peace, to provide for the option of peacekeeping forces, even the option of forces that will intervene in the face of genocide, for example, but that are fundamentally committed to preventing war first and foremost, that are not just mechanisms for either engaging in a just war concept or not being engaged at all in situations of great crisis.
There are some who believe that disputes should never be resolved through violence.
We're called to bring peace to all levels of our being and of our society, peace and justice. And by framing this as simply pacifism or just war, we are not doing justice to the full range of our humanity. There are more than two choices, much more.
Pacifism has often been thought of as synonymous with nonviolence. However, this term, popularized by the 20th century examples of Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., has also come to stand for bringing about social change through such ways as civil disobedience, nonviolent resistance, or non-cooperation and persuasion.
What's very important about these nonviolent campaigns are the particular goals that they have and this means, and there isn't one formula, but there's a way of asking questions that leads to creative nonviolent actions. For example, the goal is, one of the key goals is helping the perpetrator see the horror of their action. And so it isn't merely defeating a perpetrator, it's not merely humiliating or shaming, but finding some effective means of communication. And quite often that can happen just through talking.
Achieving peace and justice takes more than peacemaking, but also peace building. Achieving the underlying social justice and right relations within and between societies so that violence is no longer viewed as necessary.
Peace building, that takes decades. And that is the longer task of actually establishing means of people beginning to understand each other enough that they engage in a political process of debate rather than trying to kill each other. It's the process of having an education that tells a different story rather than just stories of victimization and mutual hostility. So a different narrative about what it means to be a particular people.
A lasting peace must include the work of institution building and power sharing, as well as the resolution of other driving forces of instability and conflict.
Peace building requires restoring the damage that was caused economically and ecologically by war, and then also coming up with sustainable forms of economic development. So it gets into the whole issues of addressing structural violence. And what I think very interesting is that peacemaking and peacekeeping are nonviolent. They're nonviolence at its best.
Peacemaking has been an important discussion within many religions, for concerns with how to deal with hostility, dissent, and struggle are part of human life.
Religious institutions have a great role to play here. It seems to me that the political aspect has not worked completely, that there needs to be something more, that more than an appeal to nationalism, I think there needs to be an appeal to the deep spirituality that links all of us. So it seems it's really only the religious traditions that can bring that to the fore.
Peace discussions in Christianity, Judaism, and Islam have grappled with many of the same issues already discussed here, from peace within to peace among. Similarly, many Eastern religions and philosophies emphasize the interconnectedness of peace at all levels of existence.
Religion is playing a more and more critical role in the questions of war and peace.
And it's just heartening to know that within our UU movement, we've had such a profound effect on changing the world, making a difference by listening to people in context and by adding our voice and by adding our shared story through our principles.
Unitarian Universalists have had a history of being on the side of peace. Peacemaking is a key theme in our 7 principles. Yet, as a religious denomination, we have yet to clarify our commitment to peacemaking. In building clear goals for peacemaking, we will help provide leadership in the great task at hand of building a culture of peace in our lives, our communities, and our world.
What is it that happens when someone walks in the door that beyond finding that inner peace, a sense of safety and a sense of belonging, what is it that happens that transforms them in ways that when they go back out into the world, they can cause transformation to happen?
It is incredibly timely that we're studying peacemaking at a time when there is so much animosity in the world, when too quickly we have turned to violence, when we have invaded other countries. It's time.